Hello, croeso, and welcome to We Are Cult Interviews. My name is Andrew Creak. My pronouns are they, he. I am a freelancer in TV and film based in South Wales, but most of you will know me as the writer who has been reviewing the BBC Sounds podcast, Doctor Who Redacted. Today, I have the fortune of being able to interview the wonderful producer-director extraordinaire, Ella Watts. So first up, Ella, could you tell us a little about yourself?
Hello, my name is Ella Watts. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the director and producer of Doctor Who Redacted, as has already been mentioned. So yeah, I got a couple of different hats in this production.
Ooh. So, first question for yourself. How did your involvement in this new Doctor Who spin-off come about?
Yes, gosh, every time someone asks me that, I always have a mini existential crisis because I created the show. But often, just because there isn't an easy way to phrase this question, people are like, how did you get involved? And I'm like, I was born. So basically, back in 2019, the Doctor Who brand wanted a podcast, and they wanted something specifically to serve an audience that they felt that they were underserving, which was like young women under 35 and working class communities. And so they asked us to pitch podcasts with those demographics in mind, with those audiences in mind. What actually happened was I was brought into a meeting and no one told me what the meeting was about. And as they were outlining what the Doctor Who brand wanted from a podcast, I realized that this was the meeting where I got to pitch a Doctor Who podcast. And so I still have a notebook that's just got serial killer writing of just crazy ideas that I was just writing down as fast as I could whilst everyone was introducing themselves. And I pitched Doctor Who Redacted as an audio drama that was BuzzFeed Unsolved but Doctor Who, and people liked that. And so then for about 6 months I had a kind of 2 A4 page pitch document where I had a picture of Shane and Ryan, and I was just like, yeah, that's what we're gonna do. And then eventually someone took me seriously enough that I had to find a writer, and I got Juno involved, and everything kind of expanded from there. But yes, I got involved because I had an idea and I pitched it, and for some reason people took me seriously, which doesn't happen often.
Was it clear from the offset that the podcast would turn into what we are listening to now?
Yes, I think that a lot of what we've got now is similar to what we originally pitched. So there were a couple of things that were going on over the course of the editorial development of the show. One of them was I'm an audio drama expert, which means that I am very, very aware of how common found footage is as a device, as a trope in audio drama. Whether you're going from something like Welcome to Night Vale being community radio, or you've got the Black Tapes as an audio diary, or you've got the Bright Sessions also an audio diary, or you've got Limetown about a journalist, or you've got all these, The Message, which is sort of a journalist but not really, kind of a spoiler for that podcast. But even the Lovecraft Investigations is it's got this conceit that this is found audio, which is another BBC production. And so I didn't want it to ever be entirely just the Blue Box Files, because that is something that within the context of audio drama has been quite overdone recently. And that's not to say I don't like it. There's lots of productions that do this that I love, but I just felt like going into it with that knowledge, I wanted to do something a little bit different. On the other hand, though, we knew that our main audience was going to be people who'd never listened to an audio drama before. And people are much more comfortable listening to non-fiction chat podcasts than they are to audio dramas. And so we thought if we started it with this fake non-fiction chat podcast, then people who haven't listened to an audio drama before can be like, oh, okay, I know what's going on here, this is fine. And then we kind of get them to trust us for 10 minutes, and then we're like, haha, you shouldn't have done that, you're in an audio drama now. And we would kind of get them out. So that whole thing of starting with the Blue Box Files and then going into their actual lives has stayed as a through line. One thing that has changed was when we originally pitched the podcast, I wanted to try and get it out of London a bit. And so originally Shauna and Abby were also protagonists, and they had much bigger roles. And essentially the podcast would flip perspective each week. So one week we'd be in Glasgow in Scotland, one week we'd be in Sheffield, one week we'd be in London. But because we only had 10 episodes, kind of what we realized the more we developed the show was that we just wouldn't have enough time for everyone to have a satisfying character arc when like realistically they would have like 2.5 episodes each. And so we decided to refocus it. And of all of the characters, the one that everyone kind of was most in love with was Cleo. And so even though Cleo is a Londoner, I think there are lots of other cool things about her, and there's nothing against Londoners. But yeah, it ended up being much more focused on Cleo and Cleo's journey than it had been originally. But otherwise, it is fairly similar. Like, I have the pilot from 2019, and it doesn't sound that different from our episode 1.
Chloe is definitely an amazing character, and it's mental that the pilot was done in 2019, considering
Yeah.
One of the best parts for me in Redacted is that it is a female and queer-led series. Why is this so important?
So there's a couple of reasons. First of all, like I mentioned, the Doctor Who brand specifically wanted to make a show for like women and people under 35 and working class communities. And I think especially for kind of like younger people and women, female-led stories are important, and also queer-led stories are important. I think that we see that again and again and again around the world in media, is that young people are more aware than they've ever been of LGBTQ plus identities. They care more about representation, and they can talk about that publicly. Like, I think everyone's always cared, but now you can get on the internet and you can mobilize and you can have a hashtag and you can really engage with and support shows that you care about. So things like Heartstopper, for example. Also, I am a queer woman, and I want to tell stories about queer people and about women and about people like me, but also like people who aren't like me, because I'm very posh and very white. And I think that at the end of the day, way back in 2019, right at the very start, when I had the first writers' room meeting with Juno Dawson and Sasha Sienna and Catherine Brinkworth, where we kind of worked out the initial plot of the series, I gave them a little spiel at the start where I was like, to be completely honest with you, I don't think it's likely we'll get this made. And that's for a couple of reasons. All of our main characters are women, and I'd already been told by like individuals in media that we would need a man to make it relatable. I was like, well, it's non-negotiable that these characters are queer, and that it's non-negotiable that we have a trans protagonist, and it's non-negotiable that that trans protagonist is played by a trans actor. But I knew that would make everything even more of a fight than doing an official Doctor Who audio drama for BBC Sounds as your first ever series commission would be. And so I kind of had to sit down with them and say, okay, this might not happen specifically because of what we're trying to do, but as far as I'm concerned, it's not worth doing if we don't do this. If I want a Doctor Who story about a man and a white man, then I don't have to look far. And it's very hard to beat what's already there. Like, there are some excellent Doctor Who stories about white men. I don't think that I'm just going to out of nowhere be able to do something better than that. But when I look at Doctor Who stories about women, and specifically queer women and specifically trans women, then I'm like, okay, that is something that no one has done properly yet. There have been a couple of wonderful trans women characters. There's also recently a new trans woman character in Big Finish, but like, there's still just not enough. And in that space, like, it's like, it's worth telling a story because ethically people need to see themselves represented in order to have inspiration to stay alive, figure out who they are, figure out who they love and how they love. But B, like, if you're working with a big property like this, then I think you need to think about like, who's got lots and lots of stuff and who's being left out. And as far as I'm concerned, like, a lot of the time, especially in recent years, unfortunately, in Doctor Who, the people who've been left out are women and queer people. And they were the people that I wanted to bring a story to.
So when it came to casting the series, were the actors we now hear already in your mind when the series was being written, or was it a process of auditioning several contenders for the role?
Yes, gosh. Okay, so auditioning, it was a mix of both. So for the pilot and for Cleo, we auditioned a couple of different trans voice actors, some trans women, some non-binary people who were up for playing with she, her pronouns. And when we were inviting people to audition, I was talking to Juno about it, and Juno said, to be completely honest with you, Ella, I based this young trans woman character who grew up on a council estate in London on the young trans woman I know who grew up on a council estate in London. So I think it would be silly not to invite Charlie Craggs to audition to play Charlie Craggs. And so we invited Charlie to audition, even though she didn't have any acting experience. And honestly, based on the auditions that we got, she was like a real standout. She has just such a character and such a life to her that it was really hard to think how anyone else could do that. And obviously the script is written in her voice, and everyone else was trying to pretend to be Charlie Craggs. So we brought Charlie in for the pilot. That was an audition process. And after the pilot, I was pretty like, again, this was a thing where I would not budge on some things, and one of them was Charlie Craggs is going to be Cleo no matter what. And we had lots of conversations because BBC Sounds obviously has a priority to try and make like commercial podcasts that reach large audiences, so they often try and get like really big actors in. They obviously had Pearl Mackie in Forest 404, and people who've got like screen experience especially. But Charlie, it was like we had to have Charlie. She's the heart of the show as far as I'm concerned. But then there was a pandemic, and also there were lots of big changes at Doctor Who. Specifically, when we started, we didn't know that Chris Chibnall was going to be leaving. We didn't know who was going to be replacing him, and all of that has kind of come in and had a big impact on the kind of peripheral editorial of Doctor Who, including us. So we didn't know that the show was actually going to go ahead until January this year, at which point I was told in the second week of January, around my birthday, that the show was commissioned and we would be making it, but we would be recording in the second week of February. So I had 2 weeks to cast the entire series, and then we would be releasing in April with the Easter special. So then we had like February, March, April, 2 months to produce a 10-episode series, which is not a lot of time to make an audio drama. And so with Lois and Holly, it was kind of combination of we had a short list, and we talked a lot about like who we wanted to get for those roles. Some of it was there are a couple of different people we invited, but I think for me there were a couple of clips of Lois and Holly that I saw before we like offered them the parts, that I was watching them and I was like, oh, okay, that's Abby and Shauna, like this feels like this is actually them. I could hear their voices in my head. And then we just turned up to recording, and we didn't have a chemistry check because, again, I remind you, we had 2 weeks. We didn't have like a long drawn out auditioning process. And so when we got there on day one, like me and the executive producer James Robinson are absolutely terrified about how the three of them are going to sound together, because crucially they have to sound like best friends. And we had no idea how that would happen, because Lois and Holly and Charlie had never met each other before. And then I remember they turned up, and Lois, before we even started recording, sits me down and goes, okay, Ella, so I'm really into horoscopes, and I was wondering whether you know if there's any actual scientific basis for like if horoscopes really affect your personality. And I was like, okay. And then Holly turned up, and so Lois plays Abby, right? And then Holly turns up, and Holly is wearing like this big grey like sweatshirt, this like beanie, heavy gold chain, like tracksuit bottoms, trainers, and just kind of comes in and is like, hi, yeah, no, I think the problem with the British Museum is that they steal everything. And it was like, oh, okay, like you are literally just your characters. This is good. This is helpful for us. And from there, it's just brilliant.
No, that's mental that you had to do that in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I like a rushed project because I seem to get them done quicker, but that's mental.
Yeah.
So what's the next one? Oh, this I've written this as my very important question for you. As a vital member of the production team, did you get a cameo within the series?
Oh, I am. I'm there in the crowds. Like I don't have any lines. Juno has a couple of cameos, but I am there in like the sort of when there's crowd screaming in episode 9. I'm actually going to post a video of that tomorrow, where I've got a recording of us all on Zoom, like screaming our heads off and just generally panicking. But yeah, if there's ever a crowd scene or there's someone running for their life, then there's probably a me in there, but nothing clear.
So audio as a medium isn't the most accessible, but with Redacted, you've made it more accessible by as a production by providing transcripts for those who are deaf or hard of hearing. Do you think there are future steps that audio productions can do to make these stories more accessible for all?
Oh yes, absolutely, I do. I think that this is an interesting question. So as I said, I'm an audio drama expert and I work in the podcast space already. So I I'm quite familiar with conversations around accessibility, and I would recommend, if you want to learn more about podcast accessibility, especially how it applies to the deaf and hard of hearing community, then check out the work of an activist called Caroline Minks, who you can find like on social media. They're a very, very cool deaf activist who works in audio drama, writes audio dramas, and talks a lot about how to make audio dramas more accessible. But at the same time, like, we had this big bureaucratic problem, which is that the BBC does not generally provide transcripts for any podcast, fiction or nonfiction. And so early on, I was kind of like, it's really important to me that we have transcripts. How do we do that? And they were like, question mark. And we ended up kind of getting this link on the website, which I'm glad we have something. I would love to see transcripts that were, so there's an Instagram kind of activist called Jessica Kellgren-Fossard, who's a queer person, disabled activist. And she talks a lot about how you could make a transcript like really engaging. You could essentially make a PDF that's like a glossy magazine. You can use bright colors, you can have images in there, you can have hyperlinks, you can make it like a piece of work in its own right, which is not only good for any deaf and hard of hearing people who are reading it, who often will be able to read very fast because they have to read a lot, and so reading just plain text could be quite boring, but also means that like everyone can have more stuff to engage with. I understand the complexities of like rights around like actually printing materials and costs and stuff, but I think when it comes to websites, like, I do think we should just have transcripts as a matter of course, and we should make an effort to make those transcripts as interesting and accurate as possible. Like, it's not good enough to just share the script, and that's not what we do on Redacted. Like, we do describe the music, we add any like ad-libbing that's come in, we try to add points where emotion seems crucial in the performance that wasn't already there in the script. We'll kind of like add on a tag to describe how something is being said. And any obviously sound design or sound effects that have been added or changed or moved around across like from scripting to production will update. And so quite often what I see is audio drama productions sharing transcripts that adjust their scripts, and that's fair enough. Like, this is an intersectional problem. If you are making this for free and you are doing it whilst you have a full-time job and kids and you don't have enough energy, then if that's what you can do, great, amazing, thank you for doing that. If you can do more, if you are a professional production, so something like Big Finish, something like the BBC, then I think it would be really nice to see more effort put into making sure that transcripts are accessible and legible and engaging, because that is kind of my ideal future for that whole question. But for now, like, it is a start. There are lots of things that I would change and fix, but I hope that it was a useful start for people who wanted to check out the show and might have found it difficult to otherwise.
No, yeah, that's really interesting. One thing I've seen that people wish, like Big Finish, for example, would do is whenever they release the trailers as videos, they always like caption it. And like I think that's like a nice way that they can do it. But it's like it is interesting. It's nice to hear about other people who activists working in the industry who are like pushing the way with that, because I hadn't heard of any of that. But yeah, so about a month before the BBC officially announced Redacted, I was re-listening to the first series of the Eighth Doctor Adventure audios by Big Finish, which were broadcast by the BBC on Radio 7, I believe it was. And I was talking to my friend Ross about how it felt like it was a good time for the BBC to bring some Doctor Who audios into their portfolio. So when Redacted was announced, I was so excited. Why do you think it's taken this long for the BBC to go back and showcase one of its signature shows in audio?
I think that there's a couple of reasons. One of them is just that Big Finish is really good at making Doctor Who audio drama. You know, like, I love a lot of Big Finish stories. Like, I think Big Finish are incredible just as an organization and for what they stand for and like the history of British culture. Not even just Doctor Who, but you know, I think for a really long time, it was felt that Doctor Who audio is kind of a saturated medium. Like, if you're talking about kind of companion podcasts, there are so many amazing fan podcasts out there that it's hard to kind of justify why the BBC would need another one, you know, like whether you've got something like Radio Free Skaro or Verity or all of the like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of discussion shows, like it doesn't really make sense for the BBC to do that. And then if they wanted to do a kind of audio drama, then there's Big Finish, and they're also doing hundreds and hundreds of audio dramas, and that also didn't really make sense to them. So I think for this, it really came down to like audience more than anything, which was that Big Finish is amazing, but it does tend to be more popular with a slightly older audience, with a slightly more male audience, because that makes sense. Like, these are the people who grew up with Doctor Who, like in the end of the 20th century. These are people who like really related to the Doctor, and those are wonderful people. I'm a big fan of like the entire Doctor Who community, and I especially appreciate the fact that I honestly did not expect as many older men to genuinely and sincerely support Redacted, but I would just like to say right now, thank you very much for your allyship. That was a genuine moment of feminism, and I appreciate it. But you know, Big Finish was making loads of stuff and is making loads of stuff, and they are increasingly hiring more women and queer people and telling more female focused and queer focused stories, and I don't want to detract from that. But not everyone can afford to like buy Big Finish Adventures, and BBC Sounds and the Doctor Who brand felt that there was an audience who weren't able to access Doctor Who audio stories and who might feel that Doctor Who audio stories weren't for them. And so when it made sense for us to kind of make something for a different audience to Big Finish, and I've said again and again on social media, I don't think of us as competing with Big Finish. I want us to be a kind of pipeline into Big Finish. Like, we exist alongside them, but we're really not trying to do what they're doing. And I hope that if people enjoy Redacted, then they go buy a Big Finish adventure. But yeah, like, so it was partly just time, place, demographic. I think the other thing though is that BBC Sounds, they don't commission a lot of audio drama. They're not that interested in audio drama, and that's because audio drama is very, very expensive to make, but doesn't tend to get audiences that are as high as nonfiction. So nonfiction is much cheaper to make and gets much bigger audiences. And from BBC Sound's perspective, even though it's public funded media, they have to make sure that people actually use the app, right? And like, it's public funded, which means that it should be programs and podcasts that everyone is listening to, that is serving all the people who might want it. And from their perspective, if 1,000 people listen to Redacted and 1 million people listen to Obsessed With, then they need to make Obsessed With, even if they like Redacted. And so that kind of math on audio drama means that Sounds doesn't often make audio drama. They have made a couple, like Forest 404, like the Lovecraft Investigations, like the Children of the Stones, and now like Redacted, but really it just comes down to audiences. I think that audio drama is getting more popular now, and more people are aware that audio drama exists, and more people are willing to listen to it, because we've got things like Batman Unburied coming out, and we've got like Stranger Things audio dramas, and we've got all of the big indie audio dramas from Welcome to Night Vale to the Magnus Archives. But it's still in kind of a sticky place where audio drama is essentially like an emerging or re-emerging medium for BBC Sounds, and so they're not often willing to kind of take that risk. But I'm really glad that they did with this, and if enough people listen to it, then we'll get to make more, but it entirely depends on audience figures.
So basically everyone should go listen to Redacted. So Redacted aside, what got you into the world of audio dramas, and do you remember the first audio drama you ever listened to?
Of course I do. So actually, I was a weird one, because I grew up all around the world. I grew up in Hong Kong and Australia, and that means that I didn't actually have access to the kind of Radio 4 drama tradition that tends to get written about a lot when you're talking about British audio drama listeners. And so my first audio drama was actually Cabin Pressure, which I got sent a link to by someone in Sweden whilst I was in Hong Kong. So I listened to a sitcom called Cabin Pressure, which is wonderful, by John Finnemore. And then from there, I listened to Welcome to Night Vale. And my big claim to fame is always that I started listening 2 months after they released their first episode, which is pretty early on in Night Vale history. I listened to it early enough that on their first birthday, I remember that they had a little message that has now been removed because of dynamic ad insertion, but there was a little message that was like, we're going to go to this pub to celebrate our first birthday. We really hope you turn up. And then the next episode that came out was like, wow, 100 people turned up to celebrate Welcome to Night Vale. Can you believe it? And then, you know, a year later, they were playing a sold out show at San Diego Comic-Con, and you just like hear this like wall of sound, and it was ridiculous. Like, this is actually from the 2015 Night Vale tour, which was the first time they ever came to the UK, and they played at Union Chapel. And I remember sitting outside on the pavement on this really sunny day with a bunch of other people in cosplay talking about abortion rights, because that's what happens when you go to a Night Vale live show. And yeah, so I listened to Night Vale, and then I listened to things like The Thrilling Adventure Hour, which I was obsessed with, and I can still sing the theme song to. And then I kind of just, absolutely snowballed into all of the other big shows. So whether it's like Wolf 359, Bright Sessions, Black Tapes, Limetown, But I've now got to the point where I am a little atypical because I am autistic and audio drama is one of my special interests. So I have listened to over 350 audio dramas and counting. I'm not going to keep talking about audio drama because if I do, I won't stop. But yeah, I've listened to many. But my first one was Cabin Pressure, and then Night Vale, which is a pretty classic answer. They are both quite big shows.
I embarrassingly haven't listened to any of those.
Ooh!
I have a very it's very similar to like a BBC Four way into audio drama, but mine was literally I searched Doctor Who on iPlayer and saw Eighth Doctor audio. I was like, oh, that's interesting, and it's weird because it kind of like spoiled. It was it's called Zygon Who Fell to Earth, and it's my favorite Big Finish because it was my first. But it's like it spoils like a major plot twist in an earlier episode and stuff. But I didn't care because I was like, this is so good, and that's how I ended up falling in love with it.
You say Radio 4, actually. The other big audio dramas for me were the Neil Gaiman Radio 4s. So like Neverwhere, Stardust, Good Omens, like all of those ones as well. Like I remember when they came out, I got an email on my uni account because I was an undergrad. I was like 19 years old. Then Facebook recently reminded me of this because it did the time machine thing. And it was me like posting a screenshot of a BBC email, like an absolute nerd, being like, oh, I think they know what kinds of things I like, because it was like Neverwhere for BBC.
So before I ask my final question, I'm going to jump into some questions that were submitted by some of our readers at We Are Cult. So first up, we've got Tony Filer, who, if you're a Big Finish listener to our audience, you may recognise his name because he's a big reviewer and has been mentioned in their podcast several times. What are the most important things to get right about a project like Redacted? What are the must-dos of it? And if you could redact one person or thing from all of history, what would it be?
Woo. Okay. Oh my gosh. All right.
That's a loaded question.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna start with the easier one. Okay. So what are things that you've got to get right? I think that there are a couple of key things. The first one is, I mentioned this earlier, but never, ever cast a cisgender actor to play a transgender character. Don't do it. Don't do it. Like, just don't. There are so many good trans actors out there. Cast a trans actor. And I think second thing, make sure that your creative team also has trans people in it. So like our writers room has a lot of trans people in it who are like trans women, non-binary people, because it was important to me that we had multiple different trans people writing Cleo, so that it wasn't an all cisgender writing team writing a transgender character, because I think that that can also be a problem. And for the same reason, like we made a point of employing queer people, working class people, people of color, because again, just generally speaking, someone who's trying to tell a story outside of their experience, it's possible, but it means that they're going to miss like details, and they're going to be things that an audience member, especially someone who's part of whichever community it is going to feel like a bit like, okay, they're just putting on my identity as a costume. Fine, but that doesn't feel good. And so like ideally like use this as an opportunity to employ people behind the scenes as well as like on screen. So you know, our composer David Evero is trans and queer, and our sound designer Ollie Adlington is trans and queer, like, and we made sure to try and get as many people in as possible from lots of different directions. Jen Kitney, who reads our credits, is trans and queer. Like everyone, like as much as we could. In terms of just general audio drama stuff, I think that for the audience that we were going for, which is this kind of like younger audience and like working class audience, I think naturalism is really important, like especially if you're doing something for something like the BBC or like Doctor Who. What can often happen, I think, with these big organizations and big brands is that the storytelling can feel a little bit top down. It can feel a little bit like looking down your nose at someone and bestowing on them a story. And I think like you need to meet people where they are and like listen to what they care about. So one of the things that I've said a lot about Redacted was that it was important to me that we never fell into the science fiction and fantasy trap of our characters having fantasy privilege. Because often what happens is people want to tell a story about a working class character, but then they're secretly an alien, or they're secretly a princess, or they're secretly a superhero, or they're secretly a genius. And what this ends up actually meaning is that the character has like middle class or wealthy privilege. And so like you say they're a working class character, but Tom Holland's Spider-Man has has access to multi-billion-dollar gadgets, so he's not working class. Like, and then that feels alienating for anyone who's ever felt like they've had to like fight to live or work to survive, because they're like, actually, when I was at school, I didn't feel like every door opened for me, and I don't just walk into a job, and people don't just know who I am. And like for most people, that's the case. And so I think it's finding ways to like be wary of those kind of like pit holes and try to avoid them and work around them. And then beyond that, I think again, for something like this, it was about naturalism. It was about making it sound different to Radio 4 drama. Radio 4 drama is a wonderful, wonderful thing. It is not what we were trying to do. And so because we weren't trying to do it, there were things about, we were a little bit looser around the script, and we were happy to let our characters ad lib if they felt that something would be more natural for them to say. Like, we let Lois and Holly and Charlie bring their own perspectives of their lives, of being like young women to performing young women. And I think that made them sound more real and more genuine in a really good way. There are moments, obviously, where it's crucial to get the script absolutely right, but a lot of the time there is wiggle room, and I think it's important to have that if what you're trying to make is a naturalistic drama. So I feel like that's enough on that. I hope it is. I feel like I talked for a long time. In terms of who I would redact from history, good Lord.
It's hard, isn't it? I don't know what my answer would be.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say, so I'm just going to say it. I think it's J.K. Rowling, to be honest. I feel like the trauma of having grown up as like a cis white person and not having thought about the ways in which Harry Potter was already a problem, and having really emotionally invested in it in that way that so many people did, and really like shaped myself around it and cared about it so much, and then seeing it all just be so mutilated and bastardized by this just determined cruelty and ignorance has been devastating. But I also just wish that I'd never read Harry Potter in the first place. I wish that I didn't miss it. I wish that I'd never cared about it. I wish that it hadn't existed. Like, we actually have so many good magical school stories, like namely like Ursula K. Le Guin's Wizard of Earthsea. I think that we could have had something else and better. I like Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson series. I would kind of be okay if J.K. Rowling had just never written Harry Potter and never gotten famous. Like, I feel like in some ways life would be better.
Yeah, that's a good answer. That is also my answer because I can't think of anyone else. Margaret Thatcher, there's my two.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, this was the thing. I was like, as soon as I thought about like actual political, world leaders, because you go to like, Hitler, and you go to Stalin, and you go to like, but how do you pick between Hitler and Stalin? And how do you pick between like Maggie Thatcher or Boris? How do you pick?
Cool. So the next question is from someone called Laurie. I am a big collector of Doctor Who items, and I am loving Redacted. Will there be a physical release of the series, be it CD, vinyl, etc., for us collectors to add to our shelves?
The honest answer is I don't know. I would love there to be. I would love to own a Redacted CD or vinyl, but it really comes down to how many people listen to the show. So if there's enough people who listen, there's enough people who express an interest, maybe. As of right now, there isn't currently any plan.
Fair enough. Jeremy Duncan asks, knowing this is a spin-off of Doctor Who, did you struggle at all to... Oh, sorry, I've read this wrong. Jeremy Duncan asks, knowing this is a spin-off of Doctor Who, did you struggle at all with figuring out exactly how much of the Doctor should be in this show?
I mean, yes and no, because this is also a production and I'm a producer and I have a budget. And just a little bit of media insider knowledge for you. Hiring someone who is currently the Doctor to play the Doctor is very, very, very expensive, even in audio, because people like Jodie Whittaker and David Tennant and Matt Smith and Peter Capaldi are very famous actors who cost a lot of money. And when you get given a budget for a podcast, BBC Sounds, the budget is not very high. And so, to be honest, there was mostly just the mercenary thing of, we cannot afford to have Jodie in every episode. Even if she had the time, we just didn't have the money. So it was more about how to manage what resources I did have. which was like, we definitely wanted her to be in the show. We ideally wanted her to be in more than one episode. We needed to work with her schedule, because by the time that we actually got to recording Jodie, she was out of contract as the Doctor, which means that she is now taking on many, many projects. She's also pregnant and about to have a baby. She turned up to our recording pregnant. So it's working around what Jodie could actually do, but also what we could afford, because it's important to pay people for their work. And then from there, like, then how does it fit into the story and how does it make sense in the story? We always knew, because this was a podcast, that we wouldn't have a very high budget, which meant that whatever role the Doctor would have, it would be quite a small role. I think for me, I was thinking of it along the lines of the Sarah Jane Adventures, which I really loved growing up, where, you know, the Doctor would turn up at the end of the series at a cool cameo and you'd be like, oh my gosh, it's the Doctor, but mostly it would not be about the Doctor. And I think we knew that if we wanted it to be sustainable, it needed to not be about the Doctor, but also, like, again, we had this like remit of specifically making an audio drama for young working class women and queer people, and I felt like it was more important to have real people, like real characters, rather than kind of just focusing on the Doctor. The Doctor is amazing, but if you want a story about the Doctor, watch the TV show. If you want a story like this about, I mean, for me, it was like, if I wanted a story about people like me, like, then I wanted characters who would feel like me, who are not necessarily thousands of years old, who are not necessarily aliens, who actually are just human beings who are going to live a normal lifespan and who struggle with bills and who mess up and who make mistakes, but are still worth like hearing about and thinking about. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Well, it's not my question, so I'm assuming it does for them. But yeah, I was going to say, I do feel like the little Jodie cameos are working way better in this than it did in Class. Because like that just felt so shoehorned in, but with this, it does feel very natural and right. And I was kind of, when I first went into listening it, I really wanted it to be a lot of Jodie because I love Jodie, favorite Doctor. I'm like so privileged that I got to work on her final episode, but it wasn't a disappointment when she wasn't, because it's done so well, which is like shows how well you and the team worked to get it right. So the final of the readers' questions is from Connor Hall, who's asked, what was it like working with a mix of old and new characters, working with actors who have lived and breathed Doctor Who for over a decade, as well as working with brand new talent? And was it difficult to recast existing characters such as Penny and Vastra?
Yes, oh my gosh. So, oh my goodness, there were many elements to that question. I'm just going to go backwards to front and hopefully we'll cover everything.
Yeah.
Recasting certain characters, obviously heartbreaking. We really wanted to get Neve on the show, but she was in production for a play and it was like categorically she was not available. We had very short notice. We just couldn't get her in. And so with Neve and Vastra specifically, I've talked about this on social media, but we reached out to Neve and to Stephen Moffat as the creator of the character. We were like, okay, we know we can't get you. What if we kind of make a virtue of the fact that we can't get you and have an older Vastra who's played by an older actor? And we told them that we were thinking about casting Dune McKeegan, and they both really liked that idea and were happy for us to do it. So with Vastra, I actually am quite proud of what we did, because I think as a queer person, elders in my community are really important. Like, queer people who are over 50 are really important to me. Queer people who have had spouses who have passed away and who have lived through like the trauma of the 80s are really important to me. Like, as a young bisexual woman, like I talk a lot to people who are older in my community. And so being able to make Vastra a character who is that now, like in the 2020s, to make her be this like essentially like lesbian woman in her late 50s who's had a wife who's passed away and is now like taking these young queer women under her wing, was actually for me really important. And I was really glad and felt very privileged that we were able to do that. And I think like Dune McKeegan, who came in, really understood that. And she's a mum. She has this big speech to Cleo about like motherhood and parenthood and raising trans children. And she really felt very passionate about that. And I think that that was a good thing for us to do. With Penny, it was much more boring. The actor who originally played Penny was not available on any kind of social media or ways we could contact her, and even Doctor Who couldn't find a way to contact her. We really tried to get Verona Joseph, we just literally couldn't find her. So with that, it was kind of like less of a big thing, especially because she's quite a small character like in the show. In terms of working with people who are newer and older characters, I hope I'm not missing any elements of this question. That was really exciting. It was really interesting. Very, very intimidating in lots of ways. I think that I was most intimidated by Gemma Redgrave. As the director, I had a whole conversation with her about like what Kate Stewart would do in this situation. And we really had this, like, it felt like a hostage negotiation of me going like, well, I feel like Kate would do like this, and her being like, well, no, I'm not sure she would do that, and us having to have this like very reasonable conversation, but like this essential negotiation with like, I know that Gemma knows Kate better than anyone, and so I really didn't want to come in and be like, I'm here to tell you how to do Kate now, you know. I was just trying to kind of say, to find the things that I love about Kate, because that's the thing you're excited about when you're a fan who's working on this production. You're like, I want to see those moments, those Kate moments, and for me that was about the way that she's so calm in a crisis, and that she's always so in control, and she never lets anything kind of ruffle her. So that was really fun. Ingrid Oliver was amazing. She does all of her own asthma sounds on Big Finish stuff. They never use a sound effect. She just does it with her mouth. And I thought that it was a sound effect. We got to the end and she was like, do you just want me to give you some inhaler sounds? And I was like, okay. And then she did them and we were all extremely impressed. So that was, I mean, Ingrid's just fun. Finlay Robertson was incredible. Finlay Robertson actually helped us with our read through. So he read the parts for every single male or otherwise just not female character in the entire series the first day that Lois and Holly and Charlie ever read it. So he knew the series better than anyone. And he was just absolutely lovely about it. He actually got COVID, and so he had to record himself at home, and he kind of was sending us in all these takes and being like, hi, just want to like help out, like let me know if there's anything else I could do. He's really lovely about it. And then gosh, like obviously Jodie, I mean Jodie, that's a whole different thing. That's a whole different thing. Directing the Doctor as the Doctor, goodness gracious me, I could talk for hours about that. So yeah, that was all really cool. And then with newer characters, I mean, oh my god, Angeli, also I mentioned that I watched the Sarah Jane Adventures. I watched the Sarah Jane Adventures, so when Angeli came in, I was just like, hi Ronnie, I mean Angeli, I mean Ronnie, I mean Angeli, and had lots of moments like that. Quite hard to direct her actually, because I love her character so much and she knows her character so well that I'm just sitting there going, you did nothing wrong and you can do nothing wrong and you're not capable of making mistakes. And then with the newer characters, I mean, it's just so fun for us to be able to add characters to the Doctor Who universe, like characters like Jordan, who I love, he's Cleo's brother. I have a younger brother and he's my boy. And then ridiculous characters like Alistair Beckett-King's The Floater, which Alistair had to do again remotely directed because he was on jury duty. We had so many things go wrong. But yeah, like I think it was enormous fun to kind of bring in new people and new characters. And I mean, I've said this at this point in so many interviews, but Cleo, Shauna and Abby are my daughters and I would die for them, and they are so important to me. And like I had some involvement in creating them, but really they were created by Juno in our writers' room, and then by like Holly, Lois, and Charlie in their performances. And just now that they're like living characters, they are so special to me, and I have so many feelings about who they are as people and what journeys they've been on and what journeys they can go on and where they might go and where their stories go. And for me, they're very much like alive in the Doctor Who universe, and I really hope they're doing good. But yeah, overall, just a joy.
Well, yeah, that covered every aspect of that, I think. One bit, like with doing who plays Vastra now, I do like it's really weird how like so it works having a new actor because like in the first episode you don't know it's Vastra, but at the same time sounded familiar, but not because of the actor, because of the portrayal.
Yeah.
My friend Ross, who I mentioned earlier, messaged me like, "Do you think that was Vastra?" And I was like, "Oh my god, it could be." So I was like, it just clicked that that's who the performance was like so spot on, which is like just goes to show the talent of the actor and the writing being so on point as well.
I was gonna say I really love the script for Vastra too, like Doris B. Sutherland, David K. Vance, Aja K. Baronke, and Juno obviously. Like yeah, I feel like I remember reading that script and I could hear it in Vastra's voice, like the way that she kind of phrases things and the way that she approaches things and the way that she seems so out of time. And I loved doing the opening of episode 7 and picking the music, and we always had this idea that like it's actually this really shonky YouTube advert for this weird therapy group with like, you know, sound effects of like lightning and clouds and like word art coming in. And I just I absolutely adore her. She doesn't know what a podcast is. I love her. She's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, final question for this interview today. So we lucky listeners have now heard 9 of the 10 episodes of this story arc, and with the conclusion only a few days away, what can you tell us about the upcoming episode, but in 5 words or less?
Oh,
Not to make it a challenge. I don't know why. I just like to challenge people.
oh no, I love it. I love it when people challenge me. Someone at the very start of the series asked me to describe the entire series in a sentence using the episode titles, which I did. But goodness gracious, it was hard. Okay, all right, let me think about this. I'm literally writing this down to make sure it's actually 5 words. Okay, this is not really a sentence, but it's quite cryptic. So here we go. I would say if I had to describe episode 10, lost memories remembered, reunited love.
Ooh, I like it. That's a very good 5-word summary for the upcoming final episode of Redacted.
Don't remind me.
I
don't want it to be over.
Where the hell has these 10 weeks gone? It only feels like yesterday, because obviously it was, obviously we had Legend of the Sea Devils. I knew what was going to be in the trailer, so I was like, oh, everyone's going to be hyped about that. Then obviously we had Redacted on top of that, and it was just like, it just feels like, where has it gone? Who knows?
I really don't know. I thought it would feel longer. I really did. And now I'm like, how has it gotten to this point already? There is going to be redacted news coming soon, not about future series. Unfortunately, that is still not been decided. It's gonna be based quite heavily on how many people have listened to it on the Sounds app by the end of the run.
Okay.
So we might find out within the next month or so, but we certainly won't find out before this Sunday whether or not we get to make any more. I know people within Doctor Who really like it, which is nice. And I know that the cast and crew would really like to make more, so fingers crossed. But that said, these 10 episodes will be making their way out into the world in various ways over the next 3 months, and hopefully more people will check it out, and hopefully more people will enjoy it. But yeah.
Thank you very much for your time today, Ella. Where can our readers and viewers find you should they want to support you beyond the end of Redacted?
So you can find me on social media at GEJWatts on Twitter and Instagram. And if you liked Redacted, then fun fact, I do many other queer podcast things. In fact, right now you can listen to me narrating and running a game called Thirsty Sword Lesbians in a Buffy-style Peak District adventure with many, many queer characters on a podcast called Realms of Peril and Glory. So check that out if you'd like to.
So you can listen to episodes 1 to 9 of Doctor Who Redacted for free right now over on the BBC Sounds app, with the final episode dropping this coming Sunday. And don't forget to check out the We Are Cult website, where you can read our reviews of Redacted so far, as well as reviews and news over other cult media.